I graduated with honors after working 3 jobs to pay my own way through college. My parents skipped the ceremony for my sister's luxury resort trip. What I did on that stage made them regret everything. My name is Alex, I'm 22 years old, and the day I'd been working toward for 4 years, the day I was supposed to walk across that stage and prove that every sleepless night, every double shift, every time I chose textbooks over meals had been worth it, was also the day my parents chose my sister over me for the 1,000th time. Except this time, I wasn't going to smile and pretend it didn't matter. This time, I had a plan that would expose exactly who they really were in front of everyone who'd always believed they were the perfect supportive parents. But let me back up, because this story doesn't start with my graduation ceremony. It starts 3 months earlier with a phone call that should have been exciting, but instead felt like a punch to the gut disguised as good news. I was sitting in my apartment, the tiny studio I could barely afford even with my part-time job at the campus bookstore, my weekend shifts at the coffee shop, and my evening tutoring gigs that kept me functioning on 4 hours of sleep most nights. I just finished a brutal exam for my advanced economics course when my phone rang with my mother's number lighting up the screen. "Alex, honey," she said when I answered, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was about to ask for something or deliver news she knew I wouldn't like. "We need to talk about your graduation." My heart jumped, because for one naive second, I thought maybe she was calling to ask about hotel recommendations, or what time the ceremony started, or whether they should plan a celebration dinner afterward. For years of working my way through college with almost no help from them, for years of watching them fund my younger sister Emma's every whim while I scraped by, and I still had this pathetic hope that maybe my graduation would be different, that maybe this one milestone would finally make them see me as worth celebrating. "What about it?" I asked, already feeling my stomach tighten because I recognized that tone, the one that meant something was about to be taken away from me and repackaged as something I should understand and accept gracefully. "Well, here's the thing," my mother continued, and I could hear her moving around, probably pacing in that way she did when she was about to justify something she knew was wrong. "Emma has been having such a hard time lately with the breakup and everything, and your father, and I thought she really needed a pick-me-up, something to help her feel better about herself. So we booked her a week at this beautiful resort in the Bahamas, one of those all-inclusive places with the spa and the beach and everything, and it's the same week as your graduation." I sat there in my cramped studio apartment surrounded by textbooks I'd bought used and furniture I'd found on the curb, processing what she'd just said, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to say, "But of course we'll be at your graduation. We just wanted to tell you about Emma's trip." The punchline never came. "So we won't be able to make it to the ceremony," she continued, filling the silence I'd left hanging. "But we're so proud of you, sweetie, and we know you understand that Emma really needs us right now. You're strong. You've always been strong. You'll be fine. Plus, it's just a ceremony, right? You're still graduating whether we're there or not, and we'll celebrate when we get back. Just a ceremony. For years of sacrifice, of choosing work over social life, of eating ramen while my classmates went out to restaurants, of studying in the library until they kicked me out because I couldn't afford to heat my apartment properly, all of it reduced to just a ceremony that wasn't worth canceling a vacation for my sister who'd already had 3 trips funded by my parents in the last year alone. "Emma's breakup happened 2 months ago," I said quietly, my voice sounding distant in my own ears. "And you're telling me this 3 months before my graduation? You've known about the date for 4 years. Don't be dramatic, Alex," my mother said. And there it was, the dismissal, the reframing of my hurt as overreaction, the classic move that had defined our relationship since Emma was born when I was 7 years old and suddenly transformed from only child to the responsible one who didn't need as much attention. Emma is going through something difficult, and family supports each other during hard times. You of all people should understand that. You're always so mature, so understanding. That's why we knew you wouldn't make this difficult. Family supports each other," she said, as if I hadn't supported this family by never asking for help, by never complaining when Emma got a new car for her 16th birthday while I took the bus, by never mentioning that they'd paid for Emma's entire college education at a private school, while I worked 3 jobs to cover state school tuition because they said it built character, and I needed to learn responsibility. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her when exactly family had supported me, when they'd shown up for my high school graduation or my academic awards, or literally any milestone that mattered to me. But I didn't, because I'd learned years ago that expressing hurt to my parents only resulted in being told I was too sensitive, too needy, too unwilling to understand that Emma needed more, because she was going through things while I was naturally capable, and therefore required less investment. "Fine," I said, my voice flat. "I understand. Have fun at the resort." "Oh, sweetie, I knew you'd get it," my mother gushed, relief flooding her voice. "You're such a good sister. Emma's going to love this trip. It's exactly what she needs. And we'll absolutely celebrate your graduation when we get back. I promise." That promise meant nothing, and we both knew it, but I let her pretend because I was already planning something else entirely, something that would make it impossible for them to pretend anymore, something that would expose to everyone who saw it exactly what kind of parents they really were. I spent the next 3 months preparing for graduation day in 2 completely different ways. Publicly, I was the model student, finishing my senior thesis, acing my final exams, accepting my magna cum laude honors with humble gratitude. Privately, I was building something else, documentation, evidence, a presentation that would play on the big screens during the ceremony that everyone thought would be the standard slideshow of graduate photos, but would actually be a carefully curated expose of exactly how I'd gotten to that stage and who hadn't helped me get there. Because here's what my parents didn't understand. When you tell someone their accomplishments don't matter enough to show up for, when you make it clear that your presence is conditional on whether something more interesting is happening elsewhere, you forfeit the right to claim pride in their success. And I was about to make sure everyone knew exactly what they'd chosen instead of me. The week before graduation, my mother called again to check in and remind me they'd be thinking of me from the resort, as if thoughts counted as presents, as if I should be grateful for the mental energy they'd spare me while sipping cocktails on a beach my sister hadn't earned. "We'll want lots of pictures," she said brightly. "Make sure someone takes photos of you in your cap and gown. We want to see everything we're missing." The irony of that statement, wanting to see what they were missing while actively choosing to miss it, was so perfect I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "Don't worry, Mom. Everyone's going to see exactly what you missed. I'm making sure of it." She took it as enthusiasm about photo documentation. I took it as a promise I intended to keep. The thing about being the ignored child is that you develop skills your parents never notice: observation, documentation, the ability to see patterns they think are invisible because they've never had to look at their own behavior from the outside. While my parents were busy booking spa treatments and researching resort activities for Emma's healing journey, I was in the campus media lab working with the graduation ceremony coordinator on something they'd never see coming. Her name was Dr. Patricia Morrison, and she was the kind of professor who actually noticed students, who remembered that I'd worked the front desk of the communications department for 2 years to help pay tuition, who'd watched me juggle 3 jobs while maintaining a 3.8 GPA, and had once pulled me aside to say, "You're working harder than anyone I've seen. Don't let anyone make you believe that's not worth celebrating." When I approached her 6 weeks before graduation with my proposal, I expected resistance, expected her to tell me it was inappropriate or too personal, or that graduation ceremonies weren't the place for family drama. Instead, she listened to my entire pitch, looked at the documentation I'd compiled, and said something that changed everything. "Alex, every year we have graduates whose families made their success possible, and we celebrate that. But we never acknowledge the graduates who succeeded despite their families, who had to build their own support systems because the people who should have supported them chose not to. I think it's time we changed that. She helped me get approval from the dean, helped me frame it not as a vindictive attack, but as an honest testimony about the reality of putting yourself through college without family support, about the cost of achieving success when the people who should be cheering loudest are spending their energy elsewhere. The official approval came with one condition. Everything I presented had to be factually accurate and documented. No exaggerations, no emotional manipulation, just truth presented clearly enough that anyone watching would understand exactly what had happened. So I built my presentation like the research project. It was systematic, thorough, devastating in its simplicity. I started with a photo of my family from when I was 6 years old, before Emma was born, when I was still the center of their world. My father holding me on his shoulders at the zoo, my mother kissing my forehead at my kindergarten graduation, both of them beaming like I was the most important thing in their universe. Then I showed the shift. Emma's baby photos where I appeared in the background, gradually moving further from the center of every frame until by the time I was a teenager, family photos were really just photos of Emma, with me cropped half out or standing awkwardly to the side, the forgotten eldest child who'd been replaced by the new model. But photos were just the setup. The real evidence was financial. I'd kept every receipt, every bank statement, every documentation of money I'd earned and spent over 4 years of college. I created a spreadsheet showing my income from 3 jobs, my tuition payments, my rent, my books, my food, everything color-coded and organized with the kind of precision that my economics professors had taught me to use when analyzing corporate financial statements. Total cost of my 4-year degree, $87,000. Total financial support from parents, $1,200, sent during my freshman year with a note saying, "This should help with books, but remember we're investing heavily in Emma's education, so we need you to be more independent." Then I showed Emma's financial reality, using information my mother had freely shared in family texts I'd screenshot and saved. Private university tuition fully paid by parents, $45,000 per year for 4 years. New car at 16, $28,000. Summer trip to Europe, $8,000. Spring break in Cancun, $3,500. Fall semester, mental health, shopping spree, when she was stressed about midterms, $2,000. And now, the resort vacation during my graduation week, $6,500. The numbers told their own story. $180,000 invested in Emma's college experience versus $1,200 invested in mine. A ratio so stark that even the most devoted believer in parental fairness couldn't explain it away as different circumstances or different needs. But I didn't stop at finances. I showed the text messages, the calls I'd logged, the pattern of presence and absence that defined our family dynamic. Every time Emma had a minor crisis, a breakup, a bad grade, a fight with a roommate, the family group chat exploded with support, with offers to visit, with money transferred, and problems solved. When I texted that I'd been in the emergency room with appendicitis during my sophomore year, my mother's response had been, "Oh no, do you have insurance sorted out? Emma has a recital tonight, so we can't call right now, but hope you feel better soon." I'd screenshot that message, saved it, never mentioned how it had felt to wake up from surgery with my roommate holding my hand instead of my parents because Emma's piano recital, the 4th one that semester, was more important than their eldest child's emergency surgery. I documented every academic award I'd won with no family attendance. Every time I'd made Dean's List with no celebration beyond a generic "proud of you" text that felt copy-pasted. I showed my high school graduation program with my name listed as valedictorian, next to a photo of me giving my speech to an audience that didn't include my parents because they'd been touring colleges with Emma that week even though she was only a freshman, and I'd specifically asked them to be there. Then came the piece that Dr. Morrison suggested, the one that transformed this from a personal grievance into something the whole audience would feel. I interviewed 6 other graduates in similar situations, students who'd worked their way through college while their siblings got funded, who'd built success without family support, who understood exactly what it meant to achieve something difficult, while the people who should have been proudest were investing their energy elsewhere. Their stories became a montage. Quick cuts of faces talking about working night shifts, about choosing between textbooks and meals, about calling themselves on birthdays because their parents were busy with the favored child, about learning that "I'm proud of you" from a professor or boss meant more than silence from family. I wove their experiences with mine, showing that this wasn't just my story, it was a pattern, a reality that thousands of students lived but rarely talked about because we'd been trained to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention we received, to understand that we were the strong, ones who didn't need as much, to never make our parents feel bad about their obvious favoritism. The final slide of my presentation was simple, a side-by-side comparison. On the left, my graduation day, me in my cap and gown, holding my diploma, surrounded by the friends and professors who'd actually been there for me, who'd shown up because they valued my achievement, not because they were obligated by biology. On the right, a photo I'd pulled from my mother's Facebook page posted that morning. My parents and Emma on a beach at sunset, cocktails in hand, caption reading, "Sometimes you just need to get away and focus on family. So proud of our Emma for getting through such a tough time. Hashtag family first, hashtag proud parents, hashtag beach therapy." Family first, she'd written on the day she'd chosen to miss my college graduation, apparently not recognizing the irony of celebrating family while literally excluding one of her children from a major life milestone. I saved that photo as the final image of my presentation, let it sit on the screen for a full 5 seconds, long enough for everyone in that auditorium to process what they were seeing, to understand that this wasn't an exaggeration or a misunderstanding, but a documented pattern of preference so blatant that my mother had essentially advertised it on social media while it was happening. Dr. Morrison watched my final rehearsal 3 days before graduation, and when it ended, she was quiet for a long moment before saying, "Alex, you understand that once you show this, there's no taking it back. Your relationship with your parents will fundamentally change. They'll be humiliated, angry, defensive. They may never forgive you for making this public." I looked at her and said something I'd been thinking for months. "Dr. Morrison, they've already shown me who I am to them. I'm the child they invest in only when it's convenient, who they show up for only when there's nothing better to do, who they love conditionally based on how little I demand from them. This presentation doesn't change our relationship. It just makes visible what's always been true. The only difference is that after this, they won't be able to pretend anymore, and neither will anyone else who's watched them parade as devoted parents while I've been out here surviving on my own." She nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure the audiovisual team has everything they need. Your story deserves to be told exactly as you've lived it. The night before graduation, I got a text from my mother. 'Thinking of you tomorrow. Emma says hi. She's having such a wonderful time.' This trip was exactly what she needed. Take lots of pictures for us. Love you." I stared at that message, at the casual cruelty of it, the way she could type "love you" while actively choosing luxury vacation over my graduation, the way she expected me to document my achievement for her viewing pleasure, as if her absence was a minor scheduling conflict rather than a clear statement of priorities. I typed back, "Don't worry, Mom. Tomorrow's going to be unforgettable. Everyone's going to see exactly what this moment means and what it cost. Promise you won't want to miss the video." She responded with a string of heart emojis, completely missing the warning embedded in my words because she'd spent so many years not really listening to me that she'd forgotten how to hear what I was actually saying. That night, I didn't sleep, not from nerves, but from anticipation. Tomorrow, the truth would play on screens too large to ignore, in front of an audience too big to dismiss, in a moment preserved forever on video that would be posted, shared, and impossible to delete or deny. Tomorrow, my parents would finally understand the cost of their choices. They just wouldn't understand it from a beach chair in the Bahamas. They'd understand it from the comments section, from the calls from relatives, from the social media explosion that would force them to confront what they'd spent years pretending didn't exist. Graduation day started like any other morning I'd worked through college. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. because my body didn't know how to sleep past the time my opening shift at the coffee shop usually started, made instant coffee in my tiny studio apartment because the good stuff was too expensive, and checked my phone to find my family group chat filled with photos of my parents and Emma having breakfast on their resort balcony, mimosas in hand, ocean view behind them perfectly framed, like a postcard advertising the life I'd never been invited to join. Day 3 of paradise. My mother had written at 6:47 a.m., apparently awake early enough to document her vacation, but not early enough to send her graduating daughter a good morning text. Emma needed this so much, she's absolutely glowing. Sometimes the best thing you can do for your family is give them space to heal. #blessed, #family time, #resort life. I screenshot that post, the timestamp, the hashtags, everything, one more piece of evidence that my mother was actively choosing to broadcast her absence, to celebrate being somewhere else on the day that was supposed to be about celebrating me. Then I did something I'd been planning for weeks. I posted my own photo to Instagram, a picture of my cap and gown hanging on the back of my door, my graduation cords draped over it, the early morning light coming through my single window illuminating the achievement I'd earned entirely on my own. My caption was simple: 4 years, 3 jobs, 0 family funding, 1 degree. Today, I graduate with honors and with gratitude for everyone who showed up when it mattered. You know who you are. Within minutes, comments started rolling in from classmates, professors, co-workers, people who'd watched me grind through college, who knew exactly what that caption meant, who understood that "you know who you are" was both a thank you to my actual support system and an indictment of the people who should have been there but weren't. My best friend Marcus, who'd lent me textbooks and split meals with me more times than I could count, commented, "Proudest moment watching you walk across that stage today. You earned this in ways most people will never understand." My manager from the coffee shop wrote, "For years of opening shifts, and you never once complained. That's the definition of dedication. Congratulations, Alex. You're going to do incredible things." Dr. Morrison commented with a simple emoji, a fire symbol. And I knew she was telling me she was ready, that the presentation was loaded and approved, that in a few hours everyone would understand exactly what I'd overcome to get to this moment. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother, probably responding to my Instagram post. "Such a beautiful photo. Wish we could be there, but we're celebrating you from here. Emma wants to FaceTime later to say congrats. She's been talking about how proud she is of her big sister." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Emma, whose entire college experience had been funded by the money my parents could have used to help me, who was currently on a vacation that cost more than 6 months of my rent, was apparently proud of me for achieving something she'd never had to work for. But I didn't respond because I was already getting dressed, pulling on the clothes I'd wear under my graduation gown, checking and rechecking the flash drive in my bag that contained the backup of my presentation, just in case anything went wrong with the main file. This was happening. In 3 hours, everyone would see. The graduation ceremony was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the main auditorium, a massive space that held 3,000 people, graduates, faculty, families who'd traveled from across the country to watch their children accept diplomas they'd helped earn. I arrived at noon for the rehearsal and final check. Found Dr. Morrison in the AV booth confirming that my presentation was cued correctly, that the timing would align with my walk across the stage, that the audio would be clear enough for every word to land with the weight it deserved. "Last chance to back out," she said, but her tone made it clear she knew I wouldn't. "They're going to call this vindictive," I said, not as a question but as an acknowledgement of the inevitable response. They'll say I'm airing family business, being dramatic, hurting them on purpose. "You're not doing this to hurt them," Dr. Morrison replied. "You're doing this to tell the truth about your experience in a moment when that truth is relevant and important. If they feel hurt by the truth, that's a consequence of their choices, not your honesty." By 1:30 p.m., the auditorium was filling up. Families claiming seats, taking photos, radiating the kind of pride that comes from knowing you invested in someone's success and were about to witness the payoff. I saw Marcus's mom in the crowd, holding a sign with my name on it, even though I wasn't her child, because she'd become a surrogate parent over 4 years of feeding me dinner when she knew I was too broke to eat well, and refusing to let me thank her, because that's what family does. I saw 3 of my professors sitting together in the faculty section, the ones who'd written my recommendation letters and had stayed after class to help me understand concepts I'd been too exhausted from work shifts to fully grasp during lectures. I saw my coworkers from all 3 jobs scattered throughout the audience, people who'd covered my shifts when I had exams, who'd understood that I wasn't just working for spending money, but for survival, who'd treated me like I mattered even when my own parents treated me like an afterthought. What I didn't see, obviously, was my parents or Emma. They were currently 3,200 miles away posting Instagram stories about sunset drinks and infinity pools, living their best lives while mine was about to unfold in a way they couldn't control or ignore. At 1:45 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from my father, his first communication about my graduation. "Your mother wants me to tell you she's thinking about you. Have a great ceremony. We'll want to see photos later." Thinking about me. Not "we're proud." Not "we wish we were there." Not "we're sorry we chose a vacation over your graduation." Just thinking about you. The absolute bare minimum of acknowledgement. The emotional equivalent of leaving a penny as a tip. I responded, "Don't worry, Dad. You won't need photos. This is going to be all over social media. You won't be able to miss it." He sent back a thumbs-up emoji, completely oblivious to what was coming, completely confident that his absence was a minor thing I'd forgive because I always forgave, always understood, always made myself smaller so they could feel better about choosing Emma over me. At 2 p.m. exactly, the ceremony began. The provost welcomed everyone, made the standard remarks about achievement and future possibilities, introduced the graduates with the kind of generic praise that applies to everyone and therefore means nothing to anyone. We filed in by department, alphabetically by last name. And I was somewhere in the middle, not first, not last, just one of 400 graduates whose names would be called and whose individual stories would be invisible unless someone made them visible. The first 100 names were called without incident. Students walked across the stage, received diplomas, smiled for photos, returned to their seats while their families cheered, and the ceremony progressed with predictable efficiency. Then came the moment Dr. Morrison and I had planned, a special recognition segment that the program listed as honoring non-traditional paths to success. The lights dimmed slightly, the large screens on either side of the stage flickered to life, and Dr. Morrison's voice came through the speakers with an introduction that made my heart hammer against my ribs. Before we continue with our remaining graduates, we'd like to take a moment to recognize a particular kind of achievement, the success earned by students who financed their entire education through work, who built their own support systems when family support wasn't available, who proved that determination and self-reliance can overcome significant obstacles. These students represent the reality that not everyone's path to this stage looked the same, and their stories deserve recognition. The screen showed the first slide of my presentation, that family photo from when I was 6, before everything changed, when I was still the center of their world. Then the shift, the timeline of my gradual disappearance from family focus as Emma became their priority, their investment, their reason for pride. The audience went quiet, the kind of silence that happens when people realize they're watching something real instead of ceremonial, something raw instead of polished. The financial spreadsheet appeared next, those brutal numbers showing $87,000 I'd earned and paid myself versus $1,200 from my parents, compared to $180,000 they'd invested in Emma over the same period. I heard gasps from the audience, whispers, the rustle of people shifting in their seats as they processed the magnitude of that disparity. Then came the text messages, projected 15 feet high, where everyone could read my mother's response to my emergency surgery. "Hope you feel better soon," sent after mentioning Emma's recital, the casual dismissal of my medical crisis in favor of my sister's piano performance magnified to a size that made its cruelty undeniable. The montage of other students' stories played next, faces of graduates who'd worked their way through college while their siblings got funded. Voices describing the loneliness of achieving something difficult while your family invested their energy elsewhere, testimonies that transformed my individual experience into a collective truth that dozens of people in that auditorium were living right now. And then the final slide, my parents and Emma on the beach, posted that morning, time-stamped 9:23 a.m. on my graduation day. Caption reading, "Sometimes you just need to get away," and focus on family displayed on a screen so large that every person in that audience could see it, could read it, could understand exactly what my parents had chosen instead of being here. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. 3,000 people watching my family's betrayal play out in documented, undeniable detail, understanding in real time what it meant to be the forgotten child, the self-funded graduate, the kid whose parents were literally on vacation during her college graduation because her sister's breakup recovery was more important than her academic achievement. My phone started buzzing in my pocket, once, twice, 5 times, 10 times, calls coming through even though I'd silenced it, the vibration pattern telling me that someone was desperately trying to reach me, probably my mother, probably because someone at the resort had seen my Instagram post and had checked the graduation live stream, and had realized what was playing on those screens for everyone to see. The lights came up slightly, and Dr. Morrison's voice returned. "We're now going to call the names of our graduates who financed their own education. When you hear your name, please stand and be recognized for achieving what many people accomplish with family support, but what you accomplished entirely on your own. Alex Sullivan," she called, and I stood. The auditorium erupted. Not with polite applause, but with standing ovation, with cheers, with the kind of recognition that told me I wasn't alone, that everyone watching understood what I'd overcome, that the truth I'd just exposed had resonated with people who'd lived similar stories or who'd witnessed this pattern in their own families or communities. I walked to the stage with my phone vibrating continuously in my pocket, 17 calls from my mother by the time I reached the top of the stairs, and I knew that 3,200 miles away on a resort beach, my parents' perfect vacation was being interrupted by the consequences they'd spent 4 years pretending didn't exist. I accepted my diploma, looked directly into the camera that was live streaming the ceremony, and smiled, not with bitterness, but with the peace that comes from finally telling the truth loud enough that no one could pretend they hadn't heard it. The ceremony continued after my moment, but I barely heard the remaining names being called. I was sitting in my designated seat with my phone still vibrating in my pocket like a bomb counting down to detonation, watching the missed call notifications stack up on my smartwatch. 17 from my mother, 8 from my father, 12 from Emma, and a flood of texts coming through so fast the notification preview couldn't keep up. I didn't look at my phone during the ceremony because I wanted to be present for the moment I'd earned, wanted to feel the weight of the diploma in my hands and the pride on the faces of the people who'd actually shown up for me. But the second the ceremony ended and we filed out of the auditorium, I pulled out my phone and watched 4 years of suppressed family dysfunction explode across my screen in real time. The texts from my mother were a psychological journey through the 5 stages of grief compressed into 45 minutes. What is happening? Someone just sent me a link to your graduation and said you put our private family business on display in front of thousands of people. Tell me this is a misunderstanding. Then 5 minutes later, "Alex, I'm watching this video and I cannot believe what I'm seeing. How could you do this to us? How could you humiliate your family like this in front of everyone? This is cruel and vindictive and completely unfair. Then 10 minutes after that, you made us look like terrible parents when we've done nothing but love you and support you your entire life. We gave you a home. We raised you. We sacrificed so much for you. And this is how you repay us, by airing edited versions of private conversations and making us look neglectful when that's not the truth. Then the pivot: if you needed money, you should have asked. If you felt ignored, you should have said something. How were we supposed to know you were struggling when you never told us? You've always been so independent, so capable, we thought you wanted to do things on your own. This is a horrible miscommunication, not neglect. And finally, the threat: you need to call me immediately, and we need to figure out how to do damage control. People are commenting on my Facebook. My friends are texting asking if this is real. Your Aunt Sandra called, crying, asking why we weren't at your graduation. You've created a situation that's going to have consequences for this entire family, and you need to help fix it right now. I read through them all twice, feeling nothing but a distant fascination at watching her rewrite history in real time, watching her transform from denial to anger to bargaining to victim blaming so seamlessly. It would have been impressive if it weren't so predictable. She'd learned nothing from the presentation, hadn't absorbed the financial evidence, hadn't processed the documented pattern of neglect, hadn't considered that maybe, just maybe, the reason I'd never told them I was struggling was because every time I'd tried to express any need in the past, I'd been told I was being dramatic, or that Emma needed more, or that I should be grateful for the independence they'd forced on me. My father's texts were shorter, but somehow more insulting in their simplicity. Very disappointed in your behavior today. This was inappropriate and hurtful. Call your mother. As if I were a child being scolded for a tantrum instead of an adult who'd simply told the truth about my experience. As if the problem was my public honesty rather than their private neglect. As if inappropriate was a worse offense than missing your daughter's college graduation for a luxury vacation. Emma's messages were the most fascinating because they revealed she genuinely didn't understand what she'd done wrong, didn't comprehend that being the favored child came with its own kind of complicity. Alex, what is going on? Mom is freaking out and crying, and Dad is yelling at the hotel staff about internet access so he can watch some video. They're saying you embarrassed them at graduation? I don't understand what happened. Why would you do something to hurt Mom and Dad when they've been so good to us? So good to us. She really believed that, really thought that because she'd been given everything, we'd both been given everything, that her experience of generous parents was universal rather than exclusive. She had no framework for understanding that the money they'd spent on her resort vacation could have paid my rent for 8 months, that the car they'd bought her cost more than my entire senior year tuition, that their goodness toward her had been funded by their neglect of me. I didn't respond to any of them, not yet. Instead, I opened Instagram and watched my graduation post explode. 3,400 likes in 2 hours, 847 comments and counting, shares spreading across platforms as people who'd never met me resonated with the story of being the forgotten child, the self-funded success, the kid who had to choose between family loyalty and public honesty because private honesty had never worked. The comments section was a battlefield. Supporters outnumbered critics 3-1, writing things like, "This is every eldest daughter's story, parentified, ignored, expected to be independent while younger siblings get coddled. You're brave for speaking up. I worked 3 jobs through college while my brother got everything paid for, and I've never had the courage to say it out loud. Thank you for this. Your parents chose a vacation over your graduation. That's not a miscommunication. That's a clear statement of priorities. You don't owe them silence about their choices." But the critics were vocal, hitting all the predictable notes. Family business should stay private. This is manipulative and designed to hurt people who love you. Your parents don't owe you money for college. You're an adult. You should be proud you did it yourself instead of acting like a victim. This is disgusting. Imagine humiliating your parents publicly because they couldn't attend one event. Entitled generation at its finest. I watched the battle play out in my comment section. Watched strangers argue about whether I'd crossed a line or drawn one, whether public honesty about family dysfunction was brave or cruel, whether parents who fund one child's entire life while leaving another to struggle alone deserve to be protected from the consequences of that choice. Then Marcus appeared next to me, pulling me away from my phone and into a hug that felt like coming up for air after being underwater too long. Stop reading comments from people who don't know you, he said firmly. Half those critics probably have their own guilty conscience about how they've treated their kids. Come on, we're going to dinner with people who actually showed up for you, and you're going to celebrate what you accomplished instead of managing your parents' emotional crisis. He was right, but before I could put my phone away, it rang with a number I recognized. My Aunt Sandra, my mother's older sister, the family matriarch whose opinion actually mattered to my parents because she controlled access to my grandmother's estate and had the power to influence inheritance decisions that my mother had been carefully positioning herself for over the past decade. I answered, "Aunt Sandra." "Alex, sweetheart." Her voice was warm but firm, the tone of someone who'd watched something unfold and had formed opinions she intended to share whether they were welcome or not. "I just watched your graduation video that your cousin sent me. All of it. I watched your presentation. I read the financial breakdown. I saw the text message about your surgery. And then I called your mother and had a very long conversation about priorities and parenting and honesty." My heart started beating faster. "What did she say?" "She said you'd taken things out of context, that the numbers didn't tell the whole story, that they'd offered to help but you'd refused because you wanted to be independent," Aunt Sandra replied. "So I asked her to send me bank statements proving they'd offered money you'd refused. She couldn't. Then I asked her to explain why she was on a beach during your graduation, and she said Emma needed family support during a difficult time. So I asked her why you didn't need family support during a difficult 4 years, and she hung up on me." I exhaled slowly, not sure where this was going. "I'm not calling to scold you," Aunt Sandra continued. "I'm calling to tell you that I believe you, that what you showed today matches patterns I've noticed for years but didn't want to acknowledge because it's easier to pretend dysfunction doesn't exist than to confront it. Your mother has always favored Emma. Anyone with eyes can see it. And your father has always enabled her because it's easier than standing up to her. What you did today was hold up a mirror. And they're angry because they don't like what they see reflected back. Do you think I was wrong to do it publicly?" I asked, the question I'd been holding since the moment the presentation started. "I think you were wrong to have to do it at all," she said quietly. "But if private conversations haven't worked for 4 years, if they've ignored every subtle hint and direct request, then maybe public accountability was the only option left. Sometimes the only way to make people see what they're doing is to show them what it looks like from the outside." She paused, then added, "I'm sending you a check for $5,000. Consider it back payment for 4 years of graduation gifts, birthday presents, and holiday acknowledgement you should have received but didn't. And Alex, I'm proud of you. What you did today wasn't easy, but it was honest. And honesty in families like ours is the rarest form of courage." We talked for another 10 minutes about her own experience as the responsible daughter in her generation, about patterns that repeat across families until someone has the audacity to break them, about how the people who benefit from dysfunctional systems always call accountability inappropriate because acknowledging the dysfunction would require them to change. When we hung up, I had missed calls from 6 more relatives, some probably calling to criticize, others probably calling to share their own stories of being the forgotten child, the unfavored one, the kid who'd learned that love was conditional on how little you demanded. But before I could check those messages, My phone rang again with my mother's number. And this time I answered because I knew she'd keep calling until I did, knew that she couldn't stand not having the last word, not controlling the narrative, not making me feel guilty enough to recant or apologize or somehow make this easier for her. "How could you?" she said instead of hello, her voice shaking with what I assumed was rage disguised as hurt. "How could you humiliate us like this? In front of thousands of people, on a day that was supposed to be about celebrating you. You turned it into a platform to attack your family and make us look like monsters when we've done nothing but love you. You missed my college graduation for a resort vacation." I said calmly, no emotion, just fact. "That's not me attacking you. That's me stating what happened." "We thought you'd understand," she snapped. "We thought you were mature enough to see that Emma needed us more right now, that she's going through something difficult, and that you're strong enough to be fine without us for one day. But apparently, you needed to punish us for not putting you first every single second of your life." "Mom, you haven't put me first for a single second in 4 years," I replied. "You funded 0% of my education while funding 100% of Emma's. You were absent for my emergency surgery, but present for her 4th piano recital of the semester. You chose a beach vacation over my graduation. These aren't things I'm making up. These are documented facts that I simply showed to people instead of continuing to pretend they didn't happen. You had no right to share private family information," she yelled, and I could hear my father in the background saying something I couldn't make out. "You made us look neglectful when the truth is you've always been independent. You've always insisted on doing things yourself, and now you're rewriting history to make yourself look like a victim when you're just an ungrateful daughter who couldn't let us have one vacation without making it about you." The accusation was so perfectly backwards, so completely inverted from reality, that I actually laughed, a short, sharp sound that made her go silent on the other end. "Mom, you posted on Facebook this morning that you were focusing on family while you were literally skipping my graduation. You made it about you. I just made it visible," I said. "And now that it's visible, now that people can see what you've done, you're angry at me for showing it instead of being ashamed that you did it. That tells me everything I need to know about whether this conversation is going to be productive. Don't you dare hang up on me," she warned. "We are not done discussing this. You need to post an apology. You need to tell people that video was exaggerated, that you were being emotional and dramatic, that we're good parents who've supported you in ways that don't show up on a spreadsheet. You need to fix the damage you've caused." "No," I said simply. "I don't need to do any of that. What I need to do is celebrate my graduation with people who actually showed up for it. You chose Emma and a resort. Now you get to deal with what that choice looks like when everyone can see it. Enjoy the rest of your vacation, Mom. I'm sure the infinity pool will help you feel better." I hung up before she could respond, blocked all 3 of their numbers because I knew the calls would continue otherwise, and turned off my phone completely because I was done managing their emotional crisis when I had my own achievement to celebrate. Marcus was waiting by the door with his mom and Dr. Morrison and 15 other people who'd actually been there, who'd actually cared enough to show up, who'd chosen me when my family hadn't. "Ready?" he asked. I looked at the group of people who'd become my real family over 4 years of struggle, looked at their proud faces and genuine smiles, looked at the evidence that you don't need biology to build belonging. You just need people who show up when it matters. "Yeah," I said, putting my silenced phone in my bag and walking toward the restaurant where a celebration waited that my parents would never be able to claim credit for, would never be able to appear in photos from, would never be able to rewrite as something they'd made possible. "I'm ready." The video hit 2 million views in 48 hours, spreading across platforms with the kind of velocity that happens when people see their own pain reflected in someone else's story, when a private truth becomes a public validation that says you're not crazy for feeling this way, you're not alone in living this reality, and you're not wrong for finally saying it out loud. By Sunday morning, my graduation presentation had been reposted on TikTok in 20 different edits, had spawned a Reddit thread with 8,000 comments, had been featured in 3 family dysfunction Instagram accounts with millions of followers, and had somehow made it onto a morning talk show segment about when family favoritism goes too far. I watched clips of strangers analyzing my family dynamics, therapists weighing in on birth order trauma and scapegoat child syndrome, financial experts calculating the cost of putting yourself through college versus having it funded, all of them dissecting my life like it was a case study rather than the painful reality I'd lived for 4 years. The comments section across every platform had evolved into a full-scale war zone, with people passionately divided into camps. Team Alex, who saw my presentation as justified accountability, and Team Parents, who saw it as a vindictive public attack designed to humiliate people who'd done their best with imperfect information. This is what happens when the forgotten child finally gets a microphone. One viral comment read with 15,000 likes. She didn't make them look bad. She just showed what they actually did and let people draw their own conclusions. Truth isn't slander, but the opposition was equally vocal. Imagine being so entitled that you punish your parents for not funding your entire adult life. College is a privilege, not a right, and she should be grateful she was able to work her way through instead of acting like a victim because her parents invested differently in her sister. This generation is so obsessed with playing victim, they can't see their own blessings. The battle lines were drawn not just by strangers but by my extended family, and watching my relatives choose sides in real time was like watching a family tree catch fire and burn according to patterns of loyalty that had existed long before my graduation, but were now impossible to ignore. My Aunt Sandra had apparently made a dozen phone calls after our conversation, reaching out to relatives on my mother's side and explaining what she'd seen in my presentation, what it meant, why it mattered. Her support created a domino effect. My Uncle James called to say he'd always noticed the disparity but had assumed it was none of his business until I made it everyone's business. And now he was glad I had, because silence only protects abusers. My cousin Rachel, who was 10 years older than me and had her own complicated relationship with parental favoritism, sent a long email describing how watching my video had finally given her language for her own experience of being the responsible child while her brother got funded and celebrated, how she'd spent 15 years thinking she was being too sensitive, but now understood she'd been systematically devalued. My grandmother, my mother's mother, the matriarch whose opinion carried weight that could shift family dynamics like tectonic plates, called me directly on Sunday afternoon, her voice fragile but firm. "Alexandra, I watched your presentation 3 times. The first time I was shocked, the second time I was sad, and the third time I was angry, not at you, at my daughter for repeating patterns I thought I'd raised her not to repeat. I was the ignored daughter in my generation, the one who put myself through nursing school while my sister got married and funded. I swore I'd never do that to my children, and somehow I raised a daughter who did exactly that to you. I'm sorry I didn't see it happening, and I'm sorry I didn't intervene when I should have noticed." She paused, and I heard her take a shaky breath. "Your mother called me yesterday demanding I tell you to take down the video, to apologize, to fix what you broke. I told her the only thing broken was her relationship with you, and she broke it by choosing wrong repeatedly until you had no choice but to make the pattern visible." She hung up on me. We haven't spoken since. The family fracture was immediate and brutal. Group chats split into factions. Holiday planning became a diplomatic nightmare as people declared they wouldn't attend gatherings if certain other people were there. Cousins who'd grown up together suddenly had to choose between supporting me or maintaining relationships with my parents. And the whole messy structure of family loyalty that had held together through years of quiet dysfunction collapsed under the weight of public honesty. My father's side of the family was more uniformly critical, sending messages that ranged from disappointed to furious. Family issues should be resolved privately, not broadcast for entertainment. You've damaged relationships that can't be repaired. And for what? Social media attention? You should be ashamed. But even there, cracks appeared. My father's younger brother sent a private message saying he'd always felt like the scapegoat in his generation, always felt like his accomplishments mattered less than his siblings' needs. And seeing me speak up had given him courage to set his own boundaries, even if he couldn't say so publicly, because your dad would never forgive me for taking your side. On Monday, my mother made her move. A long Facebook post clearly crafted to reclaim the narrative, to reposition herself as the wounded party, to rewrite the story of my graduation in terms that made her sympathetic instead of neglectful. I knew it was coming because 3 people screenshot it and sent it to me within minutes of it posting. Because in the age of viral drama, everyone becomes a war correspondent documenting battles they're not directly fighting. I'm heartbroken to address this publicly, but since my private family business has been made a public spectacle, I feel I have no choice but to respond to the viral video from my daughter Alex's graduation. First, let me say that I love both my daughters equally and unconditionally. The idea that I've favored one over the other is a painful mischaracterization of a complex family situation that a 4-minute video couldn't possibly capture accurately. She continued, "Yes, we were on vacation during Alex's graduation. That decision wasn't made lightly or carelessly. It was made because her sister Emma was going through a genuine mental health crisis after a traumatic breakup, and her therapist recommended family time away from triggering environments. We had to choose between being physically present for a ceremony that Alex would experience regardless of our attendance, or being emotionally present for a daughter who was genuinely struggling with her mental health. We chose the child who needed us most in that moment, which is what any loving parent would do. The financial breakdown Alex presented was technically accurate, but deliberately misleading. Yes, we paid for more of Emma's education, but that's because Emma's mental health challenges required her to attend a specialized private university with support services she needed, while Alex chose a state school, and specifically told us she wanted the independence of funding her own education because it made her feel accomplished. We respected her choice. We didn't force poverty on her. When she had her appendicitis, we were out of town for Emma's recital that had been scheduled for months, and we called the hospital multiple times to check on her. The text message she displayed was one message in a longer conversation she conveniently edited out. I understand that Alex felt overlooked, and if I could go back and change how she perceived our parenting, I would, but perception isn't reality. And the reality is that we've loved and supported both our daughters to the best of our ability with the resources and information we had. I'm devastated that she chose to handle her hurt feelings by publicly humiliating her family instead of having an honest, private conversation where we could have worked through these issues together. I hope someday she'll understand that parents aren't perfect, that we make choices in real time based on who needs what when, and that love doesn't always look identical for different children because different children have different needs." The post was masterful manipulation. It hit every note designed to make her look reasonable and me look vindictive, acknowledged just enough to seem self-aware while denying everything that actually mattered, and reframed Emma's fully funded luxury lifestyle as specialized support for mental health needs, while reframing my self-funded struggle as a choice I made for personal growth. Within an hour, it had 400 comments and 200 shares, and the narrative war had officially begun with my mother deploying every weapon in the parental manipulation arsenal. The mental health excuse, the we did our best defense that she chose this rewrite, and the classic, if only she talked to us privately, as if I hadn't spent 4 years trying exactly that. I read it twice, felt my blood pressure rise, felt the familiar pattern of her making me question my own reality even when I had documentation proving what had actually happened. Felt the pull to respond point by point and prove she was lying. Then I did something different. I didn't engage. Instead, I posted a single sentence as a comment on my original Instagram. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. When someone tells you who they want people to think they are, notice the difference. I didn't tag my mother's post, didn't link to it, didn't quote it or argue with it, just left that one statement and let people connect the dots themselves. Let them notice that my mother's public defense had come 3 days late, and only after the video went viral. Let them recognize that we did our best isn't actually a defense when your best demonstrably wasn't good enough and you have years to correct course, but chose not to until you were publicly embarrassed. The comment section under my mother's post became a battlefield within a battlefield as people who'd watched my video showed up to challenge her version of events. If Emma needed specialized support, why is she on a luxury resort vacation instead of in therapy? If Alex chose to fund her own education, why do the text messages show her asking for help and being told Emma needed it more? If you called the hospital multiple times, why didn't that show up in Alex's phone records? Your story has more holes than Swiss cheese. But her defenders rallied too. You people are so quick to judge parents based on edited highlights from a bitter daughter. Mental health is invisible. Just because Emma looks happy on vacation doesn't mean she's not struggling. Parents are allowed to make imperfect choices without being crucified by strangers on the internet who've never raised children. My phone was ringing constantly with numbers I didn't recognize, journalists wanting interviews, podcasters wanting me on their shows to discuss family dysfunction and financial neglect, even a literary agent asking if I'd be interested in writing a book about my experience. I ignored all of it because I wasn't interested in becoming the poster child for family trauma or building a career off my parents' failures. I just wanted them to admit what they'd done and either change or leave me alone, and the viral attention was a means to that end, not an end in itself. Then, on Tuesday night, Emma finally called from a number I didn't have blocked, and when I answered, her voice was different than I'd ever heard it, small, scared, stripped of the casual confidence that came from being the favored child who'd never had to question whether love was conditional. Alex, I need to talk to you, and I need you to actually listen instead of hanging up. Please. I almost said no, almost told her I didn't owe her a conversation after she'd benefited from my neglect for 4 years without ever acknowledging it, but something in her voice stopped me. A vulnerability I'd never heard before, a crack in the golden child facade that suggested maybe, just maybe, she was finally starting to understand what her privilege had actually cost. I'm listening, I said cautiously. I watched your video, she started, her voice shaking. Not the first time it went viral. I watched it then, but I didn't really see it, didn't let myself understand what you were saying because it was easier to think you were being dramatic than to admit I'd been complicit. But then Aunt Sandra called me and Grandma called me, and 3 of our cousins sent me messages asking how I could have taken so much from you without ever noticing you were struggling. And I watched it again. Really watched it this time, all the way through, and Alex, I had no idea. I swear to you, I had no idea how different our experiences were. How could you not know? I asked, and I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. You were there, Emma. You saw Mom and Dad pay for your school while I worked 3 jobs. You saw them show up for every single thing you did while missing everything I did. You knew they bought you a car and sent me a bus pass. How could you possibly not know? Because I thought that's just how it was for everyone, she said, and she was crying now, real tears I could hear in her voice. I thought you wanted to be independent, that you preferred working because it made you feel accomplished. Mom always said you were the strong one who didn't need as much support. And I believed her because believing her meant I didn't have to feel guilty about taking everything they gave me. But watching your video, seeing the actual numbers, reading the text about your surgery that I didn't even know happened, Alex, I've been the favored child. And I didn't earn it. I just accepted it because it was easier than questioning why love looked so different for you than it did for me. She took a shaky breath. I'm not calling to defend them or to ask you to forgive me. I'm calling to tell you, that you were right about everything. They did favor me. They did neglect you. They did make choices that hurt you while telling you that you were strong enough to handle being hurt. And I benefited from all of it without ever stopping to wonder what it cost you. And I'm so fucking sorry, Alex. I'm sorry I took the money. I'm sorry I took their time. I'm sorry I took the version of them that actually showed up while you got the version that only appeared when it was convenient. I'm sorry I've been part of the problem for so long that I didn't even realize there was a problem until you had to broadcast it to 2 million people just to make me see it. I sat there in my apartment processing her words. This apology I'd never expected to hear, this acknowledgement from the person who'd benefited most from my parents' favoritism, that the system had been rigged and she'd been complicit, even if she hadn't been consciously malicious. What now? I asked finally. Now I move out, she said. I'm 20 years old, and I've never paid rent, never had a job, never had to budget or struggle or choose between things I wanted because Mom and Dad funded everything. I've been living in a luxury apartment they pay for while you lived in a studio you could barely afford, and I just accepted that as normal. So I'm getting a job, I'm getting a cheaper place I can afford myself, and I'm learning what it actually means to be an adult instead of a permanent child who gets rescued from every consequence. And Alex, I'm telling Mom and Dad that I won't have a relationship with them unless they actually apologize to you. A real apology, not the Facebook post where they pretend they did nothing wrong. An actual admission that they fucked up, that they hurt you, that they need to do better. They'll never do that, I said. Maybe not, Emma agreed. But then I guess I'll finally understand what you've known for 4 years, what it feels like when your parents choose wrong and refuse to admit it. Emma's Instagram post went up on Friday morning. A photo of her standing in front of a modest apartment building with 2 suitcases and a houseplant, caption reading, "Starting over, learning what it means to build something myself instead of having it handed to me. Sometimes growth requires uncomfortable honesty about privilege you didn't earn. Grateful for the lesson, even if it came 4 years too late." Within minutes, the comments filled with people who'd followed the graduation video drama, who understood exactly what she was referencing, who saw this as either redemption or performative allyship depending on which side of the family warfare they'd chosen. My mother's response was immediate and nuclear. A comment on Emma's post that she deleted within 10 minutes, but not before 17 people screenshot it and sent it to me. Interesting how my daughters have both decided that publicly humiliating their parents is the path to maturity. I hope you're proud of yourself for abandoning the family that gave you everything. Don't come crying back when reality hits and you realize how good you had it. Then Emma's phone got cut off. Service terminated midday while she was at a job interview. Her number just suddenly dead because it had been on my parents' family plan, and my mother had canceled it without warning. The apartment they'd been paying for sent Emma an eviction notice because my parents had contacted the landlord and said they'd no longer be covering rent. The car they'd bought her, the one registered in their names, got reported stolen when Emma refused to return it, forcing her to Uber it back to their house and leave it in the driveway with the keys in the mailbox to avoid actual legal consequences. My parents were systematically dismantling Emma's life as punishment for choosing my side, for breaking ranks, for refusing to participate in the family narrative that I was the vindictive problem child who destroyed a perfectly happy family by airing private business that should have stayed hidden. I watched it happen through the screenshots Emma sent me, through the frantic texts where she asked if she could crash on my couch until she found roommates, through her realization in real time that the unconditional love she'd always believed in was actually extremely conditional on never questioning the people providing it. They're trying to prove a point. Emma texted me at midnight on Friday. They're showing me what happens when you side with you instead of them. They take everything away and force you to survive alone, which is exactly what they did to you for 4 years, except I was too blind to see it. I get it now, Alex. I finally fucking get it. She moved into my studio apartment on Saturday with her 2 suitcases, her houseplant, and a newly purchased cheap smartphone she'd bought with the last $200 in her checking account, sleeping on an air mattress in my living room because I didn't have a bedroom door to give her privacy. But I had space on the floor, and a sister who'd finally woken up to what I'd been living. We ordered pizza that night, the cheap kind, not delivery, and split it while sitting on my floor watching her process what financial insecurity actually felt like, what it meant to count dollars and calculate whether you could afford both dinner and laundry detergent. What I'd been living while she'd been posting brunch photos funded by parents who were now punishing her for developing a conscience. "How did you do this for 4 years?" she asked, staring at her phone, where her bank app showed $147.23 and no income sources. "How did you work and study and survive while knowing they were giving me everything they refused to give you?" "You learn to stop expecting things," I said quietly. "You learn that wanting their support just makes it hurt worse when they don't give it, so you stop wanting. You get good at being alone, at solving problems yourself, at never asking for help, because asking just confirms what you already know, that you're not the priority, never were, never will be." Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'm sorry I didn't learn that lesson sooner. I'm sorry you had to teach me by blowing up your whole life just to make me see what mine actually cost." We spent Sunday job hunting together. Emma applying for retail positions and coffee shop openings, the kind of work she'd never had to consider before because money had always just appeared when she needed it, parental deposits arriving like magic without her having to understand where it came from or what it meant that I'd never received the same. By Monday morning, she had 3 interviews scheduled and a new understanding that privilege is invisible until it's removed, that being the favored child had given her advantages she'd mistaken for personal qualities, that the confidence she'd always had came from never having to question whether she was valued. That same Monday, the consequences that had been building for my parents finally crashed down in ways they couldn't control or spin or rewrite with a carefully worded Facebook post that blamed their children for being ungrateful. It started with my mother's book club. Apparently, one of the members had a daughter who'd worked her way through college and had sent my graduation video to the group chat, sparking a conversation about parental favoritism that ended with 3 of the 8 members telling my mother they'd be skipping meetings until she dealt with her family situation because the energy is too negative right now. Then my father's golf league, where he'd been treasurer for 6 years, where he'd built friendships based on being the successful logistics company owner with the happy family, where people knew him as Bernard the reliable guy, had someone forward the video during a group text about weekend tea times. And by Tuesday morning, he'd received an email informing him the group had decided to go in a different direction for treasurer, and that while he was welcome to continue playing, maybe he should take some time to focus on family matters. Their church, where they'd been active members for 15 years, where my mother sang in the choir and my father ushered on Sundays, where they'd built an identity as the perfect Christian family, became increasingly uncomfortable when the pastor's wife, who'd apparently watched the video and had her own estranged daughter, started asking pointed questions in Bible study about parents who honor their own reputations more than their children's pain. By Wednesday, they'd quietly stopped attending services because the whispers had gotten too loud, because people had started looking at them differently, because you can't maintain a facade of being devoted parents when 2 million people have watched documentation of you missing your daughter's college graduation for a beach vacation. My mother's Facebook post trying to defend herself had backfired spectacularly because people did exactly what I'd hoped. They compared her words to my evidence and noticed every place her story didn't align with documented reality. Noticed that her explanations required believing I'd fabricated bank statements and faked text messages, and somehow manipulated multiple other students into lying about their experiences just to make her look bad. The cognitive dissonance was too large, and most people chose to believe the documented evidence over the defensive narrative. Her friend count dropped by 40% in 5 days. People unfriending her not necessarily because they thought she was a monster, but because they didn't want to be associated with the drama, didn't want their own family dysfunction examined, didn't want to pick a side in a war that was getting messier by the day. My father's business connections started evaporating as people quietly distanced themselves from someone whose judgment had been so publicly questioned. If he couldn't make good decisions about his own family, could he make good decisions about logistics contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars? The professional reputation he'd spent 40 years building was being contaminated by personal choices he'd thought were private, and he was discovering that in the age of viral videos, nothing stays private if it's interesting enough to share. By Thursday, my parents were experiencing something they'd never experienced before. Social consequences for their choices, professional repercussions for their personal failures, the uncomfortable reality that treating your children differently has costs beyond just the hurt child's feelings. Thursday evening, I got a call from my grandmother, my father's mother this time, not the one who'd already taken my side. And her voice was tight with something between anger and disappointment. "Alex, I need you to tell me the truth. Not the public version, not the viral video version, but the actual truth from my granddaughter, who I've known for 22 years. Did your father really miss your graduation for a vacation? Did they really fund Emma's entire college while leaving you to struggle? Is this real, or is this exaggerated for internet sympathy?" "It's real, Grandma," I said quietly. "Every number in that presentation came from bank statements I can show you. Every text message was screenshot directly from my phone. I didn't exaggerate anything. I actually left out examples because the presentation was already 4 minutes long, and I could have made it 20. She was silent for a long moment. Then, "Your grandfather would be ashamed. He put himself through college during the Depression working factory jobs, and he swore his children would never have to do what he did, that he'd fund their education, so they could focus on learning instead of surviving. Your father got his entire degree paid for, and now he's letting his daughter do exactly what his father swore to prevent. I'm ashamed I raised a son who learned nothing from his own father's sacrifice." She paused, and I heard her take a breath. "I'm changing my will. I was leaving everything split evenly between your father and your uncle, but I'm adding a provision that you and Emma get direct inheritance regardless of what your father does with his portion, because I don't trust him to distribute fairly to children he's already shown he doesn't value equally. You'll get what your father should have given you years ago. I'm just sorry it's coming from a dead woman instead of a living parent." I felt tears sting my eyes. Not from sadness, but from the validation of having someone from my father's own family acknowledge what I'd lived, confirm that I wasn't crazy or vindictive or exaggerating, that the pattern was real and wrong, and had consequences that should have come sooner. Friday morning, my parents finally called me, not from blocked numbers, not from borrowed phones, but from their own numbers together, on speaker, with voices that sounded less angry than exhausted, less defensive than defeated. "Alex, we need to talk," my father said, and for once there was no accusation in his tone, just a weariness that came from watching your life unravel because of choices you'd thought were justified until everyone else told you they weren't. "We've lost friends. We've lost standing in our community. Your father's been removed from positions he held for years, and Emma won't speak to us unless we apologize to you, which she says has to be real and can't be the Facebook post your mother already made." He continued, "This has gotten out of control. We need to figure out how to move forward before this destroys what's left of our family." "You destroyed the family," I said, my voice steady. "I just made the destruction visible. And moving forward isn't something I'm interested in unless moving forward means you actually admit what you did, take responsibility for how you treated me, and understand that rebuilding trust isn't about managing your reputation. It's about genuinely changing how you see me and how you treat me going forward." My mother's voice came through, and she sounded smaller than I'd ever heard her. "What do you want from us, Alex? What would it take for you to call off this public campaign against us? and let us start repairing our relationship. I want you to admit that you favored Emma, that you neglected me, that you chose a vacation over my graduation, and thought it was acceptable because you'd spent 4 years teaching me that my milestones didn't matter as much as her needs. I said, I want you to acknowledge that the $180,000 you spent on Emma could have helped me, but you chose not to help me because you'd convinced yourselves I was stronger, more capable, more able to handle being alone. I want you to understand that I'm not the villain in this story. I'm the child you failed who finally stopped pretending your failure was acceptable. And most of all, I want you to know that even if you do all of that, even if you apologize perfectly and admit everything, I might still choose not to have a relationship with you because some betrayals are too fundamental to overcome. Some damage is permanent. And forgiveness doesn't mean I have to give you access to hurt me again. The silence on the other end was profound. Then my mother said something I'd never heard from her before. We're sorry. We're so sorry, Alex. We got it wrong. We failed you, and we don't know how to fix it, but we're willing to try if you'll let us. It wasn't perfect. It was halting, incomplete, missing specifics, the kind of apology people give when they're more sorry about consequences than actions. But it was something, a crack in the wall they'd built to protect themselves from accountability. And I had to decide right then whether that crack was enough to work with or whether the wall itself was the problem and needed to stay destroyed. I need time, I said finally. I need space to decide if I want to rebuild something with you, or if I'm better off with the family I've chosen, the people who showed up when you didn't, who valued me when you were busy valuing Emma, who proved that biology matters less than behavior. You want forgiveness. Start by understanding you might not get it. You want a relationship. Start by accepting it might look nothing like what you want and everything like what I need. And you want me to call off the public conversation? I can't. That video isn't mine anymore. It belongs to everyone who saw their own story in mine. Everyone who finally felt less alone because I spoke up. You don't get to put that back in the box just because it's uncomfortable for you. I hung up before they could respond. And I looked at Emma sleeping on my air mattress, at my sister who'd lost everything she'd taken for granted to gain a relationship with me she'd never known she was missing. And I realized that sometimes the cost of truth is everything you thought mattered, and the reward is discovering what actually does. The video stayed up. The conversation continued. And I stopped waiting for my parents to validate my worth and started building a life where their opinion simply didn't matter anymore. Where graduation was just the beginning of success they couldn't claim credit for, couldn't take away, and couldn't rewrite to center themselves in a story that had always been mine. 6 months later, my parents sent a check for $87,000, the exact amount I'd spent on my own education, with a note that said, "We should have given you this 4 years ago." I didn't cash it. Some debts aren't about money, and some apologies come too late to matter. If you've ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-respect, drop your story in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and whether you chose forgiveness or freedom. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who love you conditionally and build a life with people who choose you completely. Hit subscribe for more stories about drawing lines that family doesn't want you to cross, because boundaries aren't cruelty, they're clarity, and clarity is the only foundation worth building on.